Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to everybody as we gather today for our Bible study. We're finally moving on to another topic. Let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. Uh, Gracious Lord, we ask that you would be with us today as we study this sensitive topic. We ask that you would guide us with your wisdom and with your grace so that we may be properly equipped to reach out to people who are dealing with the issues of gender identity disorder. We ask these things in your Son's name. Amen. All right, so we're getting into transgenderism today. I'm waiting to find out just how much YouTube's going to strike me on this one because it's a controversial topic. But anyhow, we need, if we're going to talk about transgenderism, we need to start talking about what it is. And it is a culmination of things. There's going to be a couple different things we're going to go into. But first, we're going to start off with the actual diagnosis that you can find in psychiatry. So I've got some definitions up here that are I don't know if everybody got the handout. It's in the handout, and it should be up here on the screens. Oh, you just have the okay. The first one that we have up there, which is gender identity disorder, is sadly one of those, is something that was dropped when they came out with the diagnostic standard manual. Excuse me, it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is basically the Bible of psychiatry. And so if you,
A lot of disorders.
Yeah.
It's bigger than the Bible.
Almost is. Though to be fair, they use a lot of white space. But what this is what the psychiatrists, clinical counselors, this is what they're going to use to be able to and to make determinations as to which particular mental disorder you're dealing with. They have a bunch of tools that are going to help them with that, but this has the criteria for making whichever diagnosis. And so it also defines what they are. So this is the DSM-4, which is no longer in use. They switched to the DSM-5 about 5 years ago now.
More than that.
Was it more than that?
I put the dates up there.
Oh, yeah, 2013. I knew it was recent, but I couldn't remember how recent.
And do they still diagnose this as a disorder?
No.
That's the problem.
There's a reason why I have two different definitions up there. The first one is gender identity disorder, and that is defined this way: a strong and persistent cross-gender identification, the desire to be or the insistence that one is the other sex. It must not be for any perceived cultural advantages of being the other sex. There must also be evidence of persistent discomfort about one's assigned sex or a sense of inappropriateness in the gender role of that sex. Diagnosis cannot be made if a person is intersex, which means they have a genetic or physical condition that affects the development of the physical sexual attributes. Now that's the DSM-4. That's one I'm going to use a lot of because it's one I actually have a copy of. Getting a hold of the DSMs, the current ones, particularly if you're not a licensed counselor or a psychiatrist, is a little hard to do.
Well, actually, it's not that it's hard to do. It's just really costly. It's like you have $150 to point out.
Yeah, I don't have 150. As it was, I managed to pick this one up at half price. But the uh, a couple of things we want to deal with here. One, you probably heard a term you're not familiar with. That's intersex. Intersex is a variety of physical disorders that changes one's physical characteristics. Most of them are genetic level and are in some ways similar to, say, trisomy 21 or Down syndrome, where they've got like 3 copies of the 21st chromosome for Down syndrome. In a lot of these cases, it's going to be, you'll have a guy who has 2 X chromosomes and a Y chromosome. And because of the extra X chromosome, he starts developing female body characteristics. So there'll be breast development, there'll be, the genitals will be malformed, a whole bunch of different things will happen. There's also hormonal imbalances, where you will have guys who develop female physical characteristics because they've got an abundance of estrogen being produced in their body. You'll have ladies who will have more masculine characteristics because they are producing more testosterone than is normal. Little known fact, guys make estrogen, ladies make testosterone. Because while the primary organs that make those hormones are the gonads, so testicles for the guys, ovaries for the ladies, the adrenal glands also make estrogen and testosterone. And so if your adrenal glands are a little overactive, guess what's going to happen? You might have a lady with a deeper voice and some extra body hair. You might have a guy who maybe is a little bit slighter build and has issues with breast development. And or you can also just, in extreme cases where you have, that your cells have different receptors that can interact with these hormones, if those are lacking, well, you could have a guy who develops and looks exactly like a woman.
But you can also take medication.
Yes, some of it can be alleviated through hormonal treatments, not a lot. In fact, at least up until recently, most people just ended up living as their physical characteristics were. In fact, many of them didn't even realize they had the problem until, say, they were trying to have kids, and they go to see the specialist, and the specialist tells them the very uncomfortable news, you're not really a woman. So...
Well, and sometimes at birth, I know parents will choose if there's ambiguity about the physical characteristics at birth, they have to make a decision. Are you going, how are you going?
Yeah.
It's a hard choice to make, but, and the other thing is there's a difference between transgenderism and this intersex.
Yeah,
There's an
there is.
actual biological cause for that we can look at, and there's lab tests, there's evidence to support this, whereas with the other, there's no actual physical biological.
Yeah, there's not that, and that's the reason why I'm spending some time here, because we need to make that differentiate, that distinction, because it is out there. I will say that these are statistically very rare conditions. So
The intersex part.
yeah, the intersex. Even transgender issues is also statistically very rare.
Even though that's what we hear.
Yeah. Well, as we well know, media has a habit of magnifying many different things. It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't. Honestly, all of them, they'll magnify it in some way. But anyhow, so I just wanted to quickly cover that so that we can understand that's out there. We're not really going to touch that. Instead, what we're dealing here with gender identity disorder is a disconnect that is happening between the mind and the body. So you have a person who is, as far as we can tell, a physically healthy person, be they a lady or a guy. Everything's developing as normally as possible, or has developed as normally as possible, and just otherwise, I mean, they're physically healthy, but they're insisting that they are not as their body shows.
And I don't necessarily, unfortunately, we have this in our family. So when I look at it, I don't look at it as a disconnect between their mind and their body. I look at it as a disconnect between them and God.
Well, there is an aspect to that, so we'll get into that in a little bit. But right now, we're dealing specifically with the syndrome. And of course, we can't, completely divide things out. There's a spiritual aspect to it too. But anyhow, from a strictly symptomatic approach here, we're talking about mind is saying one thing, body is saying something else. And when they say strong and persistent, they mean this happens consistently over a period of time. So this is not an instance where I just don't feel like a woman today. I'm going off, what was it, the Shania Twain? Man, I feel like a but no, this is, I think I'm a guy, and it's going on for at least 6 months. 6 months to a year is what they'll consider persistent, ongoing thoughts, as a general rule. This diagnosis was dropped when they did DSM-5. Honestly, it came down to politics. They didn't, because and the idea was that disorder just makes people feel bad. Okay, I can understand the psychology behind that, but there's yeah, and that is, and this is one of the reasons why I don't really go along with the DSM-5. It is a disorder. It is a disordered thing that is happening. Our mind and our body should be together because our mind and body are who we are. And so when one is healthy and the other is saying things are wrong, then it is a disordered reality. And then our second one that I have up here, which is the new diagnoses. Now, I should say it's not new. It was also a part of the DSM-4. It was what they decided to keep. Gender identity dysphoria. And that is, and the bullet points that I have that are in your handouts. These are what you'll find in the DSM-5. I actually managed to get a hold of this online. It's a marked incongruence between one's expressed gender and primary and or secondary sex characteristics, or in young adolescents, the anticipated secondary sex characteristics. Yeah, that's going to be a key thing that we'll talk about here in a second. So, a strong desire to be rid of one's primary and or secondary sex characteristics because of the marked incongruence. A strong desire for the primary or secondary sex characteristics of the other gender. A strong desire to be of the other gender. A strong desire to be treated as the other gender. A strong conviction that one has the typical feelings and reactions of the other gender. Feelings must persist for at least 6 months and should include at least 2 of the above. That's the DSM-5.
I see they also took out the section about it can't be because you see a perceived benefit.
Yes, that is true. This is where we begin to see the influence of the social sciences that began around the 60s. maybe 50s. I'm trying to remember my science history at the moment off the top of my head, where they started to present the idea of a separation of gender and sex, with gender being how the culture perceives the different roles of men and women, and they drew a hard line between biology and the expression. And this is where you're going to start to see some of the things that are going to pop up, and you're going to go, well, that's like stereotypical 50s lady. Or that's like, that's stereotypical guy thought from the 40s or something like that. And it's going to be presented as this is hard and fast a gender identification.
Can you give an example?
For example, there have, in listening to some of the people who have gone through transitioning and such, you'll have things like guys who liked horses and cooking more than they liked baseball and roughhousing, thinking they're a girl. And of course, here I am, I'm raising my son, and I'm the primary cook in the family. So I'm the one who's always making dinner and all the other meals. Julie does some baking. Do you know who has the kitchen play set in our house? John. Because guess what he wants to do? Be like Daddy. And we don't think anything of it because what's he doing? He's acting like Dad. But there was that perception, though, that who does the cooking in the household? Mom. And guys don't cook. And of course, I've always scratched my head over that one. Who's doing all the cooking shows? When I was growing up,
Guys do cook, but they grill.
well, there's that too.
Socially acceptable. Exactly.
But no, I mean, when I can remember growing up, the only lady I can remember doing a cooking show was Julia Childs. All the others were like these guys showing off these fancy chef techniques.
I was thinking Ratatouille there, they had the whole bit about the woman who broke into, snooty high cuisine, that it was a man's club, that,
And so I'm just sitting there going, okay, how? And then this is what got me starting on my road and questioning things. It's like, really, that comes down to, like, this was a mindset of, like, the industrial civilization.
The same
And
would be true for sewing, dancing.
yeah,
Ironing boards. Yeah.
yeah. And guess who did all the ironing in my family?
Dad.
Dad.
He was in the military.
He was, because he was military, and Mom didn't want to have to deal with getting his uniform right.
Beds. Military men know how to make a bed very well.
Nurses and military men.
Yeah, except Dad never made the bed because Dad didn't like making the bed.
I'm going to stop y'all there. It's not always military men. I was in
Yeah.
the military, so it's women too.
Yeah, yes.
Mom always told us when growing up, one of these days you're gonna marry a wife that knows how to cook, so you better learn to cook.
Yeah,
Well, that, yeah.
We had to learn to cook.
yeah.
Dad didn't cook much unless it was frying fish outside or grilling a case barbecue.
Yeah, so if you look a lot at these things, you're going to find a lot of it is based off basically misinformation. And this is actually something that has really been coming out in recent years. Much of what is available in the social sciences, and this also gets into the other sciences too. So I'm not just going to pick on the pretend science. I'm sorry.
Understand.
In the science world, mathematicians and physicists and chemists pick on the biologists as not being real sciences, and biologists and all pick on the environmental sciences and the social sciences as not being real sciences. But much of what has been produced in the last 80-some years has not been reproducible. And one of the chief places that that is showing up is in the various social sciences. And so even this will affect psychology and just all the different social studies that are out there. Um, so they were attempting to use scientific techniques and such things, but they're finding much of what was being produced just has not been reproducible.
I mean, also there's, I mean, people have argued that the attempt to make the social sciences sciences actually gutted the subjects themselves because then you started only looking into things that you could measure and you neglected everything else.
Yeah, there is that too. And another thing that we have to be aware of is when people start talking, following the science in regards to these topics. This is where it pays to know where to look. Um, you s- um, and this is one of the things I thank God for, in that I know where to start looking because of my own background in research. I was used to looking for journal articles. Because of my background at the library, I knew what journals were out there. Guess who got to file and keep all the records of those journals? Me. If it came into the West Texas A&M library, West Campus Library at Texas A&M, I was the one who was putting it into the system. So I knew it was coming in. I have friends who were jealous because I got to see all the journal articles before they did. But so you go and you start looking at studies, and almost 98% of the studies that are being done in the realm of gender studies, studies concerning homosexuality, and a lot and related issues, are self-reporting surveys. Care to guess what the most inaccurate study in the world is? A self-reporting study. And this is one that the scientific community knows about. People lie on those things because they don't want to be thought bad of. Two, people have a tendency to either magnify the good or magnify the bad. And what you're going to find there is that's going to vary by how that person's feeling at that moment in time. And three, there is motivated reasoning to have the study come out good. But one of the things you always have to look for is, are you self-selecting? Are you able to separate the examiner and the examinee and expectations? Are you wording your questions correctly? All these kind of different things.
Who funded the research?
Oh yeah,
Important thing to look at as well.
yeah,
Like politics.
yeah. Kind of. Yeah.
It is just like,
Is it peer reviewed?
Well, even peer review is not.
Sketchy.
It can be sketchy at times. I forget the name of it, but there's there's a professor out there who has made a living almost out of filing false studies to journals to see if they will actually publish it. And he published one years ago on it was the gender bias of mathematics or some mathematical.
A couple different guys, because the original Sokol hoax was about that he was writing about, yes, about finding a feminist quantum physics and whatnot. That was back in '96, I think, and it got that published. And then he wrote later that it was a hoax, and that part of it was is that he published in a social science journal, and they didn't know the science enough and didn't find somebody that, or must not have found somebody, because he told them what they wanted to hear. Here's a physicist saying what we always thought was true. Yay! And the fact that there's somebody else, like I think it was James Lindsay and his bunch, that submitted, I think, like 8 different ones in the past 5 years, at least 3 or 4 of which were published.
Yeah. So this is going to cause a whole host of questions, but I don't want us to go down the idea of thinking, okay, the transgenderism isn't an actual disorder.
There's a really good book by Leonard Sachs. He's a secular physician,
Yeah.
the misconceptions, all of those things. It is a very good book for someone who really wants a good picture of what is going on in that
Yeah.
entire.
Yeah, a lot of my information is going to be coming from some of these direct sources, but from a Dr. Beverly Yankee. Um, if you're familiar at all with Synod, that name might ring a bell because she is one of the scientific advisors for Synodical headquarters. Um, in fact, I do believe she was present the day that President Harrison was testifying before Congress concerning. Oh yes, it was the attempt to force birth control on the Little Sisters of Poverty
Little Sisters of the Poor.
Thank you. I couldn't remember the exact name, but because I always remember just Little Sisters because this is what everybody abbreviates them. The nuns who are fighting the whole requirement to have, as a part of your health insurance, birth control. And ladies by definition who aren't going to need it.
Also, and not only not needing it, but have,
Yeah, strong religious objections to it.
Hobby Lobby went through the same thing.
Yeah, and so anyhow, Bev Yankee she is a clinical psychologist. She has and she is a PhD clinical psychologist. So she's gone through all the training. She's gone through all the education. She taught clinical psychology and counseling at Concordia Mequon for a long time. So anyhow, she's one of the people I'm going to be getting some of my information from. And going back to Lisa, you noted the anticipated.
Oh, yeah.
This is one of the things the DSMs will say about both things, the disorder and dysphoria. Do not diagnose in children. And part of the reason for that is because in 95% of the cases, the dysphoria, the uncomfortableness, resolves after the person goes through puberty.
Well, that's what you have over here under other witnesses, a Dr.
Bev Yankee.
Yeah, says that they resolve by adulthood with completion of puberty.
Yeah.
Do you think that we are, even if the DSM is saying don't diagnose a child, do you think that we're circumventing that as a society? Where
Yes, we are.
diagnosing children as
I-
that and pushing it upon them?
To some extent, yes. And we want proof that they're circumventing it. We have to look no further than TV, to jazz. And he should not have been diagnosed.
Well, every TV program now, I mean, David and I watch some TV, and it's like, oh gosh, we can't watch this program anymore because we've got this. I mean, it's on every TV channel.
Mm-hmm.
Every
My daughter's, her best friend is a boy, and they like to cook. So when they come over, they bake stuff. And anyway, we just had this conversation about he was saying something about most boys don't like to cook and things like that. And we talked about how historically the arts were dominated by men. Not just
Yeah.
cooking, but you're talking about painting and sculpting and music.
And dancing, yeah, all that kind of
these
stuff.
things. So it's not a male-female thing.
Yeah.
Those types of things.
Yeah, I love to cook, and I haven't given up a man card yet.
Me either. I got pastor friends. We trade recipes. We argue. What's the real ingredients in chili?
Self-defined.
Yeah, Garrett's mom, she works cows and palpates, and
Mhm.
she does what people would consider manly work. She's very much a woman, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that a lot of some of the dysphoria and disorder is going to be linked, I think, to those perceived stereotypes.
it does seem sometimes like when you have the cases of, it feels a little social contagion
Yeah.
And so then, you know, I don't know, it's kind of like we created horrible stereotypes, and then this is our reaction against the horrible stereotypes.
Yeah, one of my friends, it was Demi Lovato, who came out and declared she was demisexual or something like that. Uh,
Yeah, I think that's the one that you only want to have sex with someone you care about.
yeah, his first comment was, "Somebody discovered Christian morality." And then his next thought was, "How much is this a reaction to the fact that we turn people into sex objects?" And women in particular are just tired of being seen as sexual objects.
I mean, I know that it has not personally happened to me, but I read when somebody was talking about that her daughter developed pretty early, and that even when she was out with her dad, she would get horrible catcalls from grown men.
Yeah,
And even her dad being with her wasn't protection anymore.
yeah.
So do you think that when we decided that, I mean, I know this is probably not a favorite topic, but when women decided to like hook, line, and sinker, accept even something like controlling their own body, like separating sex from procreation, we willingly took that on, your various means of birth control. Like we almost set ourselves up for just being sex objects. It's
Um,
just recreation now.
yeah, to some extent, our own medical technology has caused very unintended side effects.
I was thinking
We've been
there's
able
Uh,
to actually disconnect sex from procreation.
yeah,
It's
that
hard to make that connection again once
that
you've done
certainly
that.
messed up marriage quite a bit. That I mean, the logic behind marriage is utterly divorced at that point.
yeah,
And and it does seem like so much of like, you know, that like everybody expects that you'll have consequence-free sex all the time. Like, so the point that you can't just be a person who's not interested in sleeping around, you have to be you're apparently asexual. I mean, you know, it's
And I think that kind of goes back to, we have changed, gone 180 degrees different from, you know, what the family base should be. You know, the marriage being sacred and being three with God, and the family and the dynamics of the household. We've completely
yeah.
got away from that. And
Uh,
then once you go away from that, you can pretty much open yourself up to anything. Because I heard someone, I was a nurse that I was talking to at one point with these disorders and everything, and she, you know, specifically said, yes, with the gender identification, it's no longer considered a diagnosis disorder. It's something now that it's a norm. This is just how this person is and how they identify. Well, that's going to progressively get worse as the years go on. And some of the disorders that we have now that we say are true disorders, like people who have attraction to animals or people who have attraction to minor children,
yeah.
it's going to become the norm.
That and to some extent that's already happening. You are seeing the try to normalize, as they call it, minor attraction.
I must say
And we're just going away from the Bible.
Yeah.
Before we get too far off, let's do a little bit of scripture before we run out of time.
Okay. Well, I have a lot of scripture, so,
Well, let's get
but
I like the fact
yeah,
that it's Old and New Testament.
yeah. And one of the things I do want to stress here, part of the reason we're talking about this, and this is going to be part of my goal in talking about this, is we need to understand what's going on so that we can anticipate how are we going to minister to the fallout of this.
And the only way we're going to be able to know that is, where does it say in Scripture? Where can we point these people to Scripture?
Yeah, and so some of these things that we're going to be coming up with are like Genesis 1. And I'll go ahead and read this for us here. I got chapter 1, 26 through 31. All right, so, you know, let's really go back to the beginning here. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over all the things." And then I'm going to skip over. And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, And every tree with seed in its fruit, you shall have them for food. And every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps in the earth, and everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he made, and behold, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. So we have at the very beginning the idea of God creating man and woman. A very clear differentiation, and that they're both linked back to his image. So we get that idea of the two being united together into the image of God. And that's going to play a role here, particularly when we start talking about homosexuality, because that is another topic we're going to be covering. As we're starting to deal with the image of God. And I forget how to pronounce his name. Starts with a G. Oh well. Neither here nor there. Gagnon, that's his name, Gagnon. And Dr. Gagnon, theologian, used to be out at Harvard. I don't know where he is now. His theology is not exactly welcome there anymore. But anyhow, we have the very scriptural beginning. We're created man and woman. We're created in the image of God, and of course, then we get and then we get dominion over the earth and whatnot. And then we have this statement, and this is a key statement we need to really look at and we need to focus on. It is, and it was very good. And we have to remember that statement. What does very good in God's definition mean? Because that's going to be a key for us. Perfect. Good in God's definition is not like good in our definition, where we're thinking good enough for government work. When God's, yeah, or you tried really hard, or you got close, but yeah. If we want to do it the way they do with manufacturing, it is within statistical tolerances. And, when God's statistical tolerance means everything is perfect. It works exactly as it should be. It is formed exactly as it should be. It is performing exactly as it should. And he didn't make a mistake. The second part we're going to have to key on actually comes in Genesis 3. And is later repeated in Romans 10, 9? It's later in Romans. I cannot remember exactly which chapter, where Paul makes the comment, and all creation now groans, awaiting for the appearance of the sons of man. And which is basically that the fall, so Adam and Eve falling into sin, and the curse that comes with it has now disordered creation, so that creation itself is no longer good. So these three things together are going to be a foundation for us. So we have God created man and woman. It was very good. It worked exactly as it was supposed to. And could you imagine being married and not ever having a disagreement or a fight because everything was working in concert as it's supposed to? That would be like totally awesome. Yeah, it's something we can't imagine. But now we get to the fall. All right, now the marriage is disordered. How we are man and woman is disordered. How nature around us is disordered. All these things are now broken. They're not working as God created them. And that's going to be our foundation, and I'm going to have to stop there, even though I've got more to say along these lines. We'll pick up there next week. Let's close in prayer. Gracious Lord, we thank you for your wisdom, and we thank you for showing us these things that we do not normally understand. We ask that you would help us to use these, though, to help the people around us who are suffering from the disordered nature of this creation that we live in now. And we ask this in your Son's name. Amen.